an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Sex Education, Season 1, Episode 3. In this episode, Eric has a friend over from Swing Band, which he is now a part of. And Maeve needs somebody to come pick her up, and she can't seem to find anyone. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Ashleigh for commissioning this episode. Ashleigh is here in the chat with me. Hello, Ashleigh. So this episode was pretty loaded, and it was beautifully done, in my opinion, because there's such a tendency when we have these, like, you know, whenever an episode of television deals in abortion, it's often treated as a very special episode. And it's not that this wasn't treated with gravity, but it was also treated as something that's just a fact of life. And it isn't made into such a huge, like, ordeal within the show that I felt like it went a certain ways in normalizing it. And I also appreciate that this is a show called Sex Education, and that within the first half of the first season, we have a character who is dealing with pregnancy and abortion, because that is part of what our sex education should be, especially here in the United States. And it's simply not. And I know that the U.S. isn't special in terms of the difficulties in obtaining abortions and the constant attempts of, like, taking that right away from women, away from people. But the U.S. is, it has its own very particular culture around it that I find... All right, look, so I'm just going to start off this episode talking about the abortion thing, right? It's just sort of, this is something that is close to my heart in terms of personal experience, because I have had an abortion, and also in terms of women's rights. It is a major factor for me in moving forward with women's rights and our ability to live our lives as we would like, that we are able to access contraception in general and abortion in particular. No contraception is 100%, and there are mistakes made. People do stupid shit, you know, have sex unprotected. Like, would it be ideal if we never did that? Sure. But it happens. And the majority of people who have abortions are married and already have a child. So it's not even like we're talking, there's a sort of stereotype that's held up of the irresponsible, slutty teenager in terms of when we talk about abortion. And never mind the fact that slutty is just such a pointless word, but it's not actually the reality of what the demographics are like. And I really appreciated that they had Maeve here as a teen, and they also had a series of older women in the waiting room. She was not the only teen, but it wasn't all teens. Now, what I wanted to talk about personally is just the fact that there is often this thing said about how, well, we don't want people treating abortion as a birth control. You should be responsible first. And here's my issue with that. One, we all think it would be better if we could avoid the big thing by doing a small thing first. This is true of everything in life. You don't want to be caught by surprise with a disaster because you didn't save money up, and so when your roof began to leak, all of a sudden you go broke. But guess what? We don't all have the ability to save money. We don't all have the access to contraceptives. And that's a major part of the problem with sex education in the United States, is that we teach abstinence instead of teaching like actual practical information and making contraception available. So if you don't give kids the tools, they are going to fuck anyway. I know that's really wild to hear, but they will. And if we don't give them what they need to stay safe, they won't stay safe. So you can't argue that it's irresponsible, but also not equip people with what they need to be responsible. Setting that aside, again, it's ideal to prevent rather than try and cure. But that's not always possible just in life. That's just a fact. And you get to a point where it's like, well, you shouldn't have gotten pregnant. Well, guess what? I am. Now what? Doesn't help. I don't want to hear your lecture about what I should have done. Everybody has an opinion on what they would have done. And they definitely would have if they were in this person's place. No, you wouldn't. You've made mistakes too. Don't lie to me. So all of that is just, for me, the number one thing of just like, everybody's a person. Everybody lives their lives as best they can, and give people the tools they need. But secondly, even if women do treat abortion as birth control, so what? Literally, so what? It's up to them. If that's what they want to do to their body, you don't really get to say anything about that. And I always find it so odd when people cite this as a concern. Because one, it's incredibly expensive in the United States to get an abortion. I got an abortion back in 2006, I think. And back then, it was $800. I didn't have insurance. Insurance doesn't cover abortions most of the time anyway. And the whole reason a lot of people wind up knocked up when they don't want to be is that they can't afford birth control because they don't have insurance. That was the situation I was in. I had a job that provided insurance, and I lost that job because I moved, and I could no longer afford my birth control. Now, let's not talk about the fact that I had a fiance at the time who should have been fucking footing the bill for it because I couldn't, but he didn't, and I got pregnant. And I just have a hard time believing that there are enough women out there willing to spend $800 every year or two to have an abortion rather than taking precautions. And even if they do, so what? Again, it's none of your business. So it's just one of those things. It's like the sort of conversation that happens around like food stamps and stuff. And people talk about like, well, as long as you don't abuse it, so what? People are going to abuse stuff. That's not the majority. And those who actually really need the help and are not abusing it shouldn't be punished for a tiny minority who do something that the vast majority are never going to be involved in at all. It's just so irrelevant. Just shut up. So that's the first thing, is just the financial aspect of it. Secondly, having an abortion is traumatic to your body. Most people aren't going to do that again because it's a really like big deal to go through it. And if you go, like, the most I have ever heard of is I had a friend who had 3. And that is the most I've heard of because most people don't want to put themselves through that. Like I said, it's traumatic. You either get a pill and you do it at home and it's really painful and you bleed profusely and you feel nauseous and it lasts for days and you have to take time off from work. Or you go to a clinic, you get put under, they do the abortion manually, and then you are left to recover after that. And also, recover from being drugged and heal and all of this. My abortion it didn't go super well. It turns out I'm really sensitive to the kinds of drugs they use to put you under. I've never had other surgeries, so I didn't know that. But I went out like a light and barely came back to myself by the time it was time to pick me up. And I remember just leaning against the window of the car, almost unconscious, and drooling down the window because I couldn't even lift my head. I was still so out of it. And I got an infection and I wound up bleeding for a month and finally got put on a second set of antibiotics because they give you a dose of antibiotics as a matter of course. And it's just a precaution, but that didn't do the trick for me. So I can say with no qualifications at all, it was one of the worst things I've gone through personally. I don't regret it at all. In fact, I thank God every day that I don't have kids. I'm not kidding. I'm not exaggerating. And yet, I would never put myself through that again. It was just too traumatic. It really was. And I was with somebody who was not supportive. I mean, you can tell that by the fact that he wasn't paying for my birth control pills to begin with. I had to scrape together the money on my own, borrow it from my mom to pay for the procedure. And later on, I found out that he had jacked up his credit card bills going to bars, but paying for this was out of the question for him. So yeah, I think I did the right thing not having a child with that dude. What do you think? So overall, I just feel very strongly that abortion is something that is about keeping women under control. People who are against abortion claim that it's because they care about the child. I don't believe that you can care about an unborn child and want that child to be born to a person who actively does not want it. I don't believe that you can care about a child and encourage someone to increase the population of unadopted children because there are so many kids who need homes that don't have them. That acting like, oh, well, you can just put that up for adoption. No, you really can't. It's not that easy. Never mind the fact that it's hugely traumatic to a woman's body. Abortion isn't just about not wanting children. Abortion is about not wanting to be pregnant or give birth. Because they literally change your body forever, irrevocably. It's just a fact of what childbirth does. That kind of thing, to demand that a woman put herself through that for a being that isn't even fully alive. Like, late-term abortions are not... This is a whole different conversation. It's, in my opinion, deeply missing the point about what you should want for a child to have a healthy home, missing the point of what you should be doing to make the world a better place for children, because there are children who are already alive out there needing help and support, and you are not bothering with them. So what are you doing? And it just feels like it's the last thing that our country is holding on to that actively is about our oppression. We have a lot of things that we hold on to in a sort of shadow sense, where it's a very subtle manipulative thing where we're trying to keep women in their place. But abortion is much more overt to me. And it's about the fact that women are not seen as full people. We are seen as having one function, and that is to have children. And we are a function, not people. And so the fact that we don't want to have kids often can come as a shock outright. And wanting to rid ourselves of a child that we are going to have, it is played up as like this monstrous thing. I just don't understand why anyone believes that a person who actively doesn't want children should be forced to have one. You're treating that person like this is an experiment, like you're just sending them to their room. It's 18 years minimum. What are you talking about? And secondly, you're punishing a child. You're making a child feel like they are absolutely like a consequence, because that's usually the way that it's worded. Well, if you don't want kids, you shouldn't have sex. That's what you get. Meanwhile, a man can walk away. There's no way to make a man suffer the kinds of consequences for sex that women apparently are supposed to suffer. But we don't want to have that conversation because it doesn't fall in line with what people who hold these sorts of views want to pretend it's actually about. They want to pretend it's about an innocent life. It's not. It's really not. It's just not. And I wish to God that we didn't still have to have this kind of fucking conversation. I'm just so... What kills me about it is that the people who want to outlaw abortion really seem to think that's going to outlaw abortion. Like, that's going to make it so that they don't happen anymore. When has that ever been true? Abortions have happened forever. Ever since women discovered that there was a way, they have managed to find ways to force a miscarriage. It's just, kids are a huge amount of responsibility and a drain on energy and resources, and not everybody has been prepared for that. So the idea that will bring it to an end if we pass a law, no, what you are going to ensure is that thousands of women die from unsafe abortions, from attempting to do it at home, from doing a black market abortion with somebody who isn't qualified, from getting an infection afterwards from somebody who was qualified. And when you look at the history of it, there were men who would pose as abortion doctors when it was illegal, and they would rape the women before doing the procedure. And the women wouldn't say anything because the procedure was illegal. And they sought it out, and they knew that if they went to the cops, they'd be prosecuted. So these guys preyed on women who were incredibly vulnerable and unwilling to say a word against them in public. And that's what these people want us to go back to. And I just can't wrap my head around it. I truly can't. So anyway, I'm sorry. I know that I'm 20 minutes in and I haven't talked about the episode itself, but it just needs to be fucking said. It just does. I'm sorry, Ashleigh is in the chat and she's making a lot of comments. Let's see. I did hear of one woman who was getting abortions roughly once every 6 months or so because her husband was a disgusting racist who wanted her constantly pregnant, but that's another story altogether. And that's another thing, is like pregnancy is used to control women. So, yeah. That's definitely a thing. Is like, there are men out there who will actively try and get a woman pregnant to keep her in her place, so to speak. Whether that means with them, whether that means at home and not working, whether that means simply tied to them in a way that isn't, you can't get out of that. And now they are dependent on you financially. That's just absolutely a thing. So I think that it's really frightening to a lot of these old dinosaurs out there to think that women could take control of their lives in such a way that there's nothing you can do to force them into the position you want them in, where they are dependent on you entirely. So anyway, Ashleigh says, I meant rapist, but yeah. Oh yeah. That makes more sense. I was like, oh, that's weird. So anyway, this episode, I just really appreciated how it handled this. It wasn't judgmental about it. Even the woman who was in all the time was treated with a certain amount of compassion. You know, she says something about how she'd rather be it's better to not be a mom than to be a bad one. And her daughter is the one who comes and picks her up. So it's one of her own children who is like aware of what's going on. And I appreciate that there's no explanation as to why she's gotten pregnant over and over again. Because we have this tendency, and I am super guilty of this, to try and justify why it's okay for somebody to get an abortion and do the like, well, what if somebody's raped? Well, what about like underage kids and molestation, and you're trying to, all of these different instances that we think of, or, the situation that Ashleigh brought up with a woman who's being raped by her husband. But the truth is that isn't relevant. It's none of our business. And if you really believe that women have the right to an abortion, you shouldn't qualify it at all. Just across the board. Are they being irresponsible about it? Maybe. Who cares? Should they have been more careful? Maybe. Who cares? That's just all it comes down to every time. It's none of your business. So I wasn't sure when this woman was introduced, who is in there all the time, how they were going to handle it. And I did like that, despite the fact that they don't get judgmental with like that character about the fact that she has gotten multiple abortions, they do have her crying about it some. They do have her feeling a way about it. And I just think that that's an honest representation of what it's like. As I have said, I do not regret getting my abortion at all. I have no, guilt over it. I'm not haunted by it, that kind of thing, That said, the stigma of it can still wear at you. It can still make you feel like you don't want people to know. And that's part of why I talk about it so frequently and so openly. I don't want this to be a secret for so many women. It's just sort of a thing where we take it for granted that the friends that we hang out with or the women that we work with have never had one and don't get it. And the truth is, a lot of women have had one. My friends, out of the several that I have for my bridesmaids, I know at least half of them have. It's very common, and I wish that we could be more frank about it. But it's understandable when you have people outside the fucking clinic screaming in your face that you don't want to bring it up because you don't know what kind of reaction that's going to receive. And I mean, I would not bring this up freely in front of Owen's family, for example. They're all born agains, and I am not interested in hearing what they have to fucking say about it. That said, if they started talking shit about abortion in front of me, I would tell them and just be like, so, do you want to do this, or are you going to shut the fuck up now? So, and the whole thing with Otis thinking that he is going to go on a date with Maeve and then finding out that she needs him to collect her, I was just like, this is tragic. I felt so bad for him. It couldn't be less of a date. Oh my God. I did find it a little bonkers that she just walks out of there. That, for me, was the only thing about this episode that I was like, that is super unrealistic. I got wheeled out in a wheelchair, and that was partially because I was affected by the drugs more, but everybody else has also been wheeled out. Like, when I was there, I saw other women get wheeled out before my appointment even began. So, I was certainly affected more, but that was standard operating procedure, literally. Everybody got wheeled out to their car, and there was no way I would have been in a state to walk home after. I wasn't in a state to walk until the next day. Just straight up. So that was the one thing that I was kind of like, this is weird. They're really behaving like she just went and got a filling or something at the dentist. And it is certainly more traumatic than that. It's just, that's part of the reason why she's required to have somebody come and collect her. Because you're not capable of driving yourself home afterwards. You're not capable of anything afterward. So I did sort of wish that they were able to depict that a little bit more realistically. But Otis doesn't have a car. It's not like, I don't know how they would have I guess he would have just led her out to a taxi or something. I guess that could have worked. I don't know why they didn't do that. Maybe because they're not wanting to talk about it in front of a driver. I don't know. But that's the one thing is I don't want there to be the stigma around it morally. But I do think that it should be represented as what it is, which is like a pretty invasive surgery. And it's not something that can be taken care of in an afternoon and then you just go back to your life. You are going to be out for at least a couple days from work. It's going to be tough. You're going to have to, take medications to make sure you don't get an infection and all this shit. So anyway, again, I'm sorry. 26 minutes in. I'm sorry. But this is a major thing. And it also is really funny. The two people who are outside of the clinic who are screaming at everybody, they sort of humanize them, but also make sure that they are still pretty terrible by the end. And I did find it really funny, the way that they were handled, because I was sort of like, what are we doing here? At first, I was just like, oh, I like that they're showing how fucked up it is to have people outside a clinic yelling in your face, especially if you're at a certain kind of clinic. Half the people going in there aren't getting abortions, you idiots, but still, you're over here screaming like you know anything. But then when Otis begins to chat with them, and the girl is like, oh, I'll come with you to the shops, I was like, did I say Owen? Otis. I keep almost saying Owen. I can't tell if I did. I sort of wondered, oh my God, are we going to get like her turning out to be a better person? Is he going to change her mind or something? And no, he just helps her deal with like this one issue that she has going on with her apparent boyfriend. And I also really enjoy the fact that she goes down the litany of sexual experience that she has, but then is outraged at the fact that the guy that she's with has had sex before marriage. This is again another thing. The arbitrary lines that are drawn about what counts and what doesn't count is so amusing to me, especially the older I get. In high school, I personally knew a girl who only had anal sex because as far as she was concerned, if she didn't get it in her pussy, she was a virgin. Boom, done. As long as she hadn't had a P in the V, then it still counted that she was a virgin and she was able to say that and she was being honest. But she would take it up the ass all the time. And it's just baffling to me. Truly. Like, there is just a point where you're like, you have to see that this is essentially the same thing, right? Like, the spirit of the law is what's being violated here. It's fine. So yeah, this whole thing, the conversation that they wind up having is really funny. And I do like that, like, they wind up bonding again over the fact that he fixed the sign because he misspelled fetus. It's just really funny. And that she calls it cheating, but it turns out that she meant cheated on Jesus. You're supposed to wait until marriage. So I think I've talked pretty much. Okay, I'm going to back up a tiny bit and I'm going to talk about Otis and his nocturnal emission. All right. I'm fascinated by Otis's feelings towards sex. When he's talking about it with Eric at the assembly in the morning, he says something about how he objectified Maeve and he feels like a bad person. And that he doesn't like how this feels. And it's really interesting to me that it was a subconscious, it's a dream. You know, you're not objectifying her actively. It was something completely out of your control. It has nothing to do with what kind of person you are. But he's clearly just not being rational about this in the first place. And I have a lot of like questions about how, because I was saying before that I understood where he was coming from due to having had a partner who also had a parent who was way too open, and it sort of like got in their head. But I feel like it's going beyond that with him, and he overthinks everything so much. And it's also just that classic thing where you can give other people really great advice, but you don't take it, or you don't know how to apply it to yourself. He's out here helping people. You know, he has several appointments at the beginning of the day and is able to talk very frankly with everyone. But when it comes to just having a wet dream, he's like freaking out about it and acts as if this is the most embarrassing thing that's ever happened to him. He doesn't want his mother to even know about it, which is sort of like, once we see what she does, I'm like, oh, that's why. Now it makes all the sense. But at the time, I was like, dude, she's a sex therapist. She's not going to care. She's not going to judge you that you had a wet dream. What does she care? But it turns out he knows his mother better than I did. So he has this. He wakes up in the morning. He freaks out and pulls the sheet off his bed and puts it under the bed. And I will say at one point when his mother comes in his room, she pulls the sheet up and looks at it, and the stain on it is very large. And I was like, damn, boy, you really do need to be jerking off, because that is just too much. That feels like no wonder, you know? But he specifically tells her not to go into his room. And she very specifically violates that. And that, I think, is really important. I said before about her going into his room that I really understand that, you know, as a parent, you're going to do that. There's a point at which you should have the right to check up on your kid. But there is also a boundary that they get to draw with you. And as long as their safety isn't at risk, I think that's fair. But he asks her not to go in there for a very, you know, personal reason. He doesn't tell her what it is, but that shouldn't matter. And she goes in anyway. And it would be one thing if she had been putting together other weird behaviors of his and come to a conclusion that he was doing something like with drugs. If there was something that she were actively concerned about and thinking was going on, I might have more sympathy. But that's not the case. She goes in there out of curiosity. She just wants to know what's going on, and that's not good enough. So it bothered me a lot that she did that to begin with. Then when she's writing the nocturnal emissions in teenage boys thing, this is in response to his father, her ex. I don't know if it's ex-husband or if it's just ex-lover or what, but he sends her a book or a box of books called Pillow Talk that he wrote. He's having her sign them. I don't really know what that's about, but I don't know if she co-wrote it or something. But he Skypes her, and the guy playing him is familiar to me. He was from A Knight's Tale, I'm pretty sure. I can't remember who the actor is. Ashleigh says, that's kind of why I was less forgiving with her behavior around the party. On its own, it's one thing, but she definitely seems over-invasive. Yeah, agreed. And it recontextualizes her showing up there. So it really feels like this conversation that she has with him, he talks about how her publisher dropped her and is sort of insinuating that either she can't find a new publisher and he knows that, which it turns out seems to be a little bit true. But she also is telling him that she's writing a new book, and it feels like that's absolutely not happening. We don't have specific confirmation of that or not. And I find it interesting that she's so worried about writing a book because she seems to have a thriving, business with her clients. So I don't know why exactly she is so concerned about the writing of a book thing. Is she struggling financially, or is it purely ego? Because it feels like it's purely ego. And she lets him get to her with his comments so that eventually he's straight up gotten in her head, and she sits down and writes the emissions in teenage boys in response to him needling her, which is the worst possible reason to do something like that. And then later, when Otis comes home from his deal with Maeve, he runs into a client in the hallway who's doing Kegel exercises, and she goes out to get some water and congratulates him on his ejaculation. So his mother is out here telling people about it. Unforgivable. This is really the moment where I was like, okay, somebody needs to sit this bitch down. Because there is a point at which you have just lost all of your child's trust. And if I were Otis in this situation, that's it. I'm not telling her shit again, ever. And she had better be prepared for me to lie for the rest of my life about shit that doesn't even matter, because I'm not interested in involving her. That's what you get when you're like that, you know? So, I don't know. Frankly, I'm shocked. I am. Like, the fact that she would tell a stranger this. It doesn't seem like he knows who this woman is. And even if he did, it doesn't matter. What are you doing? So, that's the deal with him, is like, he goes up to his room and he sees that she has washed the sheet and folded it and put it on his bed. And I think, more than anything, I was shocked at the fact that she would not only invade his privacy by going into his room when he asked her not to, but then not try to hide it. Because her going in there is already bad. But I was like, all right, well, you figured out what it is. Just leave it alone. And then she goes and throws it in the wash. And I was like, now he's going to know you were in there. What are you doing? And it just took me a minute to realize she really doesn't care if he knows. She doesn't have any boundaries with him at all. It's just so not a factor that it's very worrying. So we will see how that goes, but I really hope that he kind of lays into her next episode. So, all right, let's talk about Eric. Eric is struggling a little bit. Oh. Sorry guys, Ashleigh is in the chat saying, Remy is played by James Purefoy. I don't know if that's how you say his name, Purefoy. Played Mark Anthony in Rome. I remember that now, thank you. And the serial killer in The Following. I don't think I saw The Following. I saw Following by the guy who did Memento, and I saw It Follows. But I did not see The Following. But yeah, he's fairly well known, and he's really good at being this like incredibly passive aggressive and condescending dickhead. And it's also fun because I just kind of assumed that Otis's dad was going to be completely out of the picture. And so getting this introduction to him was unexpected and interesting to me. She said something about how, please Skype Otis this week. He gets really down when you don't. And, you know, he hasn't even like mentioned his dad, I don't think. So I'm like, is that true? Or is she just trying to like put some pressure on him in return because he's doing that to her? I don't know. But anyway, okay, let's talk about Eric. Eric is struggling with the fact that Otis is on to something new that does not involve him. And this is really like difficult to watch because on the one hand, I completely understand where Otis is coming from with wanting to feel like you have like a purpose, like you have a place in things, and also making some money and putting some of the like knowledge that has felt like a burden to actual use. However, he doesn't even tell Eric that he's going to school early to have some appointments before classes start. So Eric shows up at his house to like pick him up and he's just not there. And that's really, really rude. Just on its face. That's just a rude thing to do. He doesn't seem to even realize it either. Like later on, they meet up together and he doesn't like apologize for forgetting to tell him or anything. Unless I missed it, but I don't think he does. And then this like conversation that Eric has with Jean, because when he arrives, Otis is already gone. She's like, well, do you have any hobbies? Because she can sense that her son's into something that doesn't include Eric. And it gets him thinking about some things that he could begin to focus on himself. So he gets approached in the hall by the teacher who does band. I don't know what this teacher's name is, but he is really... He's like the joke that we make about teachers who are trying too hard to relate to their kids. And it's one of those things where I love the way that he does it, because as much as it makes you like wince and it's super cringy, there's an element of sincerity to it that almost makes me think, I don't know how much this is just for the kids. I kind of wonder if this isn't just how he talks to people, because he's just like that, you know, like, because there are people like that. And he comes up to Eric and asks him to audition for swing band, which, you know, he got that note from them on their first day back telling him that he was garbage. So it's understandable that he's feeling a bit reticent about it. He goes and does his audition. It's not good, but it becomes clear that they are desperate for a French horn because the person who plays it right now has leukemia. So that's why. And Eric winds up getting into the swing band just by default. And I'm sure that this is what winds up happening, because in a school, you're not going to have a whole selection of people who play every given instrument to choose from. That's not how it works. So on the one hand, I'm concerned because Eric really needs to get better fast in order to keep up with the rest of the band. And I don't know that he's up for that or even that interested. On the other hand, it is, for me, promising that he has chosen to do the audition at all and join swing band at all, because it feels like he really hears Jean's advice and decides to take it. And I am such a contrary, defiant person that if somebody tries to give me that kind of advice, I will be way too resistant to it, even though it's good advice, out of the gate. It's a stupid thing that it's my problem, but that's how I am. And I really appreciated that he's not, you know. I liked the fact that he was like, you know what, I'm going to do it. I am going to sign up for this thing and I'm going to do it. And when he has his instrument with him later at lunch, Otis doesn't even notice or like ask about it. And he gets very salty over the fact that Otis doesn't seem to be aware of any shit that's going on with him, which you would be, you know. It's like he completely forgot about his best friend overnight. Throughout these scenes as well, we see, is it Adam, the headmaster's son, like haunting his steps? He's sitting across from him in the cafeteria, just staring him down. And then he's at the lockers and he like winds up getting hailed by the teacher, so it sort of saves him. But I'm just really starting to think, is Adam gay? Is he? There is something about the way he picks on Eric that feels like there is a lot more going on there. And I don't know. I think there's something else happening there. So I don't know if that's ever going to be, you know, but we'll double back to talk about Adam in a second. So Eric is, you know, he's at swing band. He is told by the girl next to him, we could practice today and I can give you some pointers and get you caught up. And as she says it, I think she plays like the clarinet or something, and she had puts it in her mouth. And I was like, okay, this bitch is trying to fuck, immediately. And we saw at the start of the episode her drawing some frankly amazing artwork of tentacle porn, essentially, and alien porn. And indeed, she comes to his house. We get an amazing scene of him watching TV with his half dozen fucking sisters and his dad. I am really interested in seeing more of Eric's family. His sisters are all very excited that he had a girl over because they don't seem to realize that he's gay. His father does seem to know, and I thought he was going to be more of an asshole about it. He's certainly not nice about it. But he isn't abusive, which is frankly what I was worried about. Instead, he says, get that stuff off before your mother sees. And I'm like, okay, so does that mean Eric's mother is unaware of the fact that he's gay? Or is it simply the fact that he's like wearing makeup and women's clothing? He's not even really wearing women's clothing. He's got earrings on, but I think that's like the extent of it. Is that just like a bridge too far? I'm just interested in where the line is between Eric and his parents about what they know and are willing to accept. Because his sister's all joking around about how he has a girl in his room. His father gets a pretty grave expression on his face. Like, he is perfectly aware what they think is going on is not what's going on. So it doesn't feel like a surprise to him at all. But the fact that none of his sisters seem to be aware means that it's not something the family talks about. It's not common knowledge. It seems like the kind of like don't ask, don't tell sort of attitude. So it's just a shame because I can't imagine having to hide so much of who you are. I have lied to my parents, as has everybody alive, but there's a difference between just, getting out of trouble and telling some fibs here and there and actually having to pretend to be like a different person. And that's just so draining. And I just really feel for anybody who is in that position because I can't imagine. So thank you. People are telling me her name is Lily. So Lily comes over and there's this moment where Eric is like playing the horn and he's got his back to the rest of the room. And the way it's filmed, I immediately was like, oh, he's going to turn around and that bitch is going to be stark-ass naked. And indeed, he turns around. She's not completely undressed, but she's topless. And is like, so, did you want to fuck her? And he's like, oh my God, I'm gay. What? And she's like, oh, really? And it's just so amusing to me. Like, I feel like he's very open. Everybody at school seems to know he's gay. So she's very behind the times. And then she's just like, you could pretend I'm a boy. Like, she is so thirsty. And eventually is like, well, I definitely want to see the gay porn that you're talking about. And I am really excited about this, to be honest, because Eric is so much more interested and open about his interest in sex than Otis is, that I was just sort of wondering last episode, when it's clear they don't see eye to eye on that stuff at all. Well, how do they talk about this stuff with each other then? And it turns out that maybe he could have that kind of friendship with somebody else. And it doesn't have to be the same kind of like, it doesn't have to be the same, because what I was worried about, to be honest, with the introduction of Eric as Otis's best friend, is that Eric being the sassy gay friend and also being way more promiscuous, it was going to turn into too much of a stereotype. But if we throw in a girl who's also just as thirsty and interested in fucking as soon as possible as Eric is, I feel like that balances it out nicely. And it's also a bit of a surprise because we don't really get female characters who are actively horny in that sort of way. Maeve is different because her sex feels a lot less like it's about the sex for her. It feels like that's like about control and it's about something else. Her trying to like connect but not knowing how to do that. But sometimes it's not a big psychological thing. Sometimes a bitch just wants some dick. That's it. It's that simple. And I really appreciate that this show is willing to show a female character being like, no, but I need it in my pussy now, though. Please, for the love of God, I just need it. Need it. And that is relatable. That was my high school experience. That was it. I was just so horny all the fucking time. I could barely focus in class sometimes because I was just thinking about how later I was going to get laid, how earlier I had gotten laid, trying to feel each other up in the fucking hallway, having sex in the school bathroom. Any time, any place did not matter. this was what I was like. So just Lily, girl, you're in good company. Same. And eventually they do watch some gay porn, and she's just straight up like, well, that looks fun, as they're watching rimming. And that's when his dad comes in, and I love her fucking ducking back in. I asked to see the rimming. Sorry. Oh my God, girl. Get out. Get out. Leave. Poor Eric. I just really want to know what his mother's like, because we've only seen his dad so far. We saw his dad calling him and him immediately wiping all this makeup off his face. And I'm wondering if the fact that Eric is wearing makeup and women's clothing is meant to signal that he is perhaps trans, or if it's simply that he's like enjoys doing that, just wearing makeup and wearing like clothing that has been assigned to women but doesn't. Who cares? Like, honestly, it might just be that, you know? It's like, it's so quick. I'm so quick to be like, maybe he's trans. And then I'm like, or dresses are awesome and he just wants to wear them. Like, it doesn't have to be a gender thing. It can just be a clothing thing, you know? So anyway, yeah. I really, like, I just worry about him, and I want to know what's going on with him. So then we're going to back up and we're going to talk about Jackson and, by extension, Adam. We get to see a little bit of Jackson in this episode, which was fascinating. I didn't know we were going to like branch out this much. And now it makes me wonder if we're going to continue to branch out even further, because we saw some of Lily's, like, you know, illustrations and the stories she's writing and shit too. So it looks like maybe the show is going to go in a few more directions than I was expecting. And I didn't realize. So in the morning, Jackson wakes up, gets out of bed. He goes for a jog with his mother, as it turns out. So, y'all, I was so confused. Multiple things confused me here. First of all, his mom is white. Now, I don't know if it's supposed to be that he's adopted. He's certainly not biracial. But I was also like, well, maybe she's like, because when they are shown jogging away in the morning, they're jogging away from like a big building. And I was like, maybe this is like a coach from a program that he's participating in or something. But no, it seems like that's their house. So, okay, shit. Oh, yeah, that's true. Ashleigh says she could be his stepmom also. Oh my God. And she quoted, I think it'll feel like two becoming one, like the Spice Girls said. Oh my God. Forgot about that line, sweetie. But yeah, it could be his stepmom. Whatever the case, this bitch needs therapy. That's what it comes down to. Oh, shit. Bert says she's septa unella, by the way. Oh, damn. Okay. Noted. Well, that makes sense because she's really into shame. But yeah, she says something to Jackson about how you don't want to live with regrets. And it's so tragic because people just don't hear themselves. She really thinks she's helping him, but what she's doing is putting her baggage on him. You know, you don't know what his regrets are or would be because you don't know what he actually wants because you don't listen to him or even ask. So what are you even talking about? And it's just impersonal as well. The way that she talks to him, I actually kind of appreciated this. So she jogs with him to school, tells the coach to like push him hard. And it seems like it's all in good fun. But there is a sort of like undercurrent of like, all right, bitch, chill. He is in the pool training before school even starts. Alone, I might add. This isn't something that's standard for everybody. He's by himself. And then he has the meet after school. And he wins the meet, gets his best time ever, PRs. And then she says, we can do better. That's like the first thing she says. But she doesn't do it because what this could easily have been was the kind of talk that teen movies will do. You know, there's teen dance movies, teen sing movies where there's a parent who pushes their kid really, really hard. And it's not necessarily the main character. Usually it's not the main character because the main character is the one who desperately wants to sing or dance and their parent won't let them. But there's always like a side character whose parent pushes them to sing or dance when they don't really want to, kind of thing, right? And usually the way those types of lines are delivered is like, you can do better than that. That was pathetic. They do it like really over the top, mean sort of just, you know. And the way his mother delivered the line was, oh my God, that was great. And I'm going to talk to so-and-so because we can do better than that. We really have to focus now. So it's couched really believably to me in like, I'm being nice to you. I said I was proud and I'm glad of your progress and I can see that you did well and you won, for God's sake. But I am not going to let that be it. I am going to immediately follow it up by how you have to continue to improve. And that's really the thing for me that always sort of got under my skin personally, because I was an overachiever who got pushed a lot. And it always felt like it was never quite enough. I could do so well, and there was still more that I could have done. There was still another first place on the horizon that I needed to get. And it was just, you couldn't rest. You couldn't be satisfied. You could never feel like you had done it. It was always like you were in the middle of trying to do it. And even if you did, it was just a momentary fleeting satisfaction. And it just, I just really felt everything that was going on with him a lot. And when he gets out of the pool, the headmaster comes over to him and he's calling him son. He literally says, my son, at one point to himself, granted, but nevertheless, goes over and hugs him, tells him how proud we all are of him. The school is so proud of you. And meanwhile, fucking Adam is in the stands watching his dad fall all over himself to like congratulate this kid. And just, it's really like so sad. It's just traumatizing, you know? And I don't know. I'm wondering, like, could it be partially that he's like attacking Eric because he's black and he sort of sees Eric as a stand-in for Jackson? Like, is that a thing that could be going on? That he's just frustrated at the fact that his dad loves this kid so much more than him, clearly. And so he's directing it at somebody else who just looks like the guy he hates. I don't know if that's it. I don't know if he even blames Jackson necessarily, you know. But yeah, it's really sad. And he had asked Maeve to come to the meet, and she doesn't come because she's getting an abortion of his child, BT Dubs, which she does not tell him. There's a moment in the hall where it seems like she might, but no. And I really liked that moment of him getting out of the water and sort of like looking around to see if maybe she came after all. And later on, after his mother tells him that he needs to go, she says that she's going to hire a nutritionist. This kid looks like a fucking sculpture. I don't think I've ever seen a more perfect specimen of a human body in my life. Honestly. And she's out here talking about how he needs a nutritionist. Bitch, how? Where? What are you talking about? Oh my God. He's gonna fucking have an eating disorder, you lunatic. But he texts Maeve and says, I missed you today. And then deletes it, doesn't send it. And it's interesting to me that he's choosing not to reach out. I feel like he has to assume it's because she's not that interested. But she is a little, I think, despite herself. And I'm wondering if it's ever going to come out, you know, that she had an abortion, that she was pregnant. I don't know how he'd react to that or if she would ever tell him, you know, but I don't know. So I'm very interested in Jackson because I can relate to his deal. That overachieving thing and the pressure. It's a lot, man. It's a lot. And it's something that I can't relate to is that what he excels at is something that is very physical. So there's a real expiration date on that. You can't keep this up for your whole life. You get a window, and around age 20, things begin to change. And around age 25, your performance just drops because your body's just starts to slow down. That's just what happens. And I always have extra sympathy for overachievers in the arena of sports specifically, because I know what it's like to tie your entire identity towards your success in a particular field. And I can't imagine how much worse it is if you tie it to a field that has a really short shelf life. That's so much worse. And then what? You better hope that you are so wildly successful that you make all the money you will ever need in that window, and then you can just retire on it like a fucking really fucking famous football player. But swimming? Probably not. Sorry. You're going to have to find something else to do. It's just tough, man. Ashleigh says he's the one I'm most attracted to. Not going to say no to more Jackson. Yeah, he's just stunning. I think in terms of like sheer prettiness, Eric edges Jackson out because Eric's got a beautiful face. It's really absurd. His skin is just so glowing. Whoever does the makeup for this show overall is excellent because all the characters look very distinct from one another. And that's not something that happens a lot, especially in shows like this where it's a lot of people who are young and beautiful. The temptation is to make them all young and beautiful. And so you'll get a lot of people looking very similar because the artist did the same thing, trying to make them all look, quote, their best. But I really like the fact that, like, Maeve, it has the heavy smudged eyeliner look of somebody who maybe hasn't taken her eyeliner off for the past 6 weeks. It's just a very distinct look. Lily had like the face paint on and everything going on with her that she did at Eric's house, but they don't try and make it look good. And when she comes over initially, she hasn't got makeup on, and it's just like she's allowed to look specifically how she does. Meanwhile, I think her name is Amy, right? The one that was sleeping with Adam. And she's got a slightly more refined makeup look because she's somebody who would watch makeup tutorials and stuff and really give a shit about all of that. So I really appreciate that too, because there's just this thing that happens on shows like this a lot where all of them begin to look sort of the same, and it's not usually a problem because you just sort of accept that in a lot of shows, but this makes them feel a little bit more like real people, and especially like real teenagers. So I appreciate that. So I have to wrap. I'm over time. But thank you again, Ashleigh, for commissioning this. Let me check and see when the next episode is, but I've been really enjoying this. Friday, April 2nd. So a week from today. Oh my God, no. 2 weeks from today? Who knows? April 2nd. You guys know. So I will see you all then. Thank you again. And until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.